book was actually a happy combination of two things. I've taught courses on this subject matter of Christianity and politics, Christianity and the political order for a number of years, but hadn't really given any thought to writing a book about it. It just was a course I taught. But a friend, Peter Fahn, a professor at Georgetown University, is the general editor of a series, and he approached me about would I contribute to the series, and I asked him what would he want me to write on. He said, could you do something on Christianity and politics? So between his invitation and my experience of having taught courses on this, I thought, well, I have some knowledge about what is it that students might enjoy reading about, might enjoy learning about under this broad topic of Christianity and the political order. So the book came about really by way of one class preparation and being a teacher, but also you might say the immediate cause was a friend's request to write the book. And because he gave me that final little push, the book got done. The title that I chose, Christianity and the Political Order, was quite deliberate on my part. On the one hand, I wanted that topic of Christianity and politics to be cast broadly. I didn't want it to be reduced to the narrower topic of church and state. While I deal with that question at various points in the book, it's more than just about two institutions, church and state. And I didn't want it to be just about Catholicism, because the story of Christianity and politics is much broader than the Roman Catholic tradition. I wanted to talk about Lutheranism, Calvinism, which had a huge influence on politics in the West. I also wanted to trace the biblical materials, and I wanted to cast an understanding of Christianity to be broadly ecumenical. So both because I wanted a broader frame of reference than Catholicism, although Catholicism is the dominant, might say, tradition that I deal with within Christianity, I wanted it to be broadly ecumenical. And I wanted it to be the political order, because I didn't want it to be understood as just the state, nor did I want it to be understood just simply as politics in a partisan sense. In fact, that's a fairly small part of the book, is partisan politics. I wanted it to really be about how Christianity has interacted with the process whereby people live together in society and come to govern themselves and pursue common goods together. So that's why the Christianity and political order was attractive to me, because I wanted it to be a fairly broad net that I was casting. I guess the readership, what I would like in my wildest dreams would be all the people who read the top 10 list in the New York Times on Sunday. But figuring that won't happen, I was writing with an eye towards educated adults and perhaps advanced undergraduates. I don't think the book is really aimed at freshmen or even sophomores, but perhaps upper-class undergrads who've had some courses in history or political science or theology or philosophy, political philosophy. They, I think, can read it and appreciate it. And I think educated adults in general can read it. So it's not aimed at my colleagues on the faculty. It's not a book that I wrote for peers. It's not a book that advances novel hypotheses or argues for a new perspective on things. It's an attempt at trying to write a fair, middle-of-the-road assessment of how has the Christian tradition interacted with the wider world of public life. The writing of the book was a challenge in a couple of ways. I was very fortunate in that I had been given a 2-semester sabbatical. And I thought, well, that's when I'm going to get this book done. Because, as I mentioned, I was working already in the field, had taught courses on this. So I had some class notes. I had bibliography assembled. I kind of knew what were the high points I wanted to work on. Because the book is not a simple, straight historical narrative. I make no claim to being an historian or to doing a comprehensive narrative of Christianity and the political order. Rather, I try and pick out certain individuals or certain events, certain moments in time that I think have particular resonance as being very representative or as being turning points in the relationship between Christianity and the political order. And I had a sense of what those were going to be before I actually sat down and wrote the book, having taught courses in the area. And in the first semester, I got a fair amount of work done on the book. Probably 2/3 of the book was done in the first semester. And then I developed cancer. And I had to go through surgery and radiation and kind of had lost the second semester. And I was more upset about that than my medical diagnosis. But very graciously, when I came back to campus, the provost's office, in the person of Pat DeLue, our vice provost for faculties, Pat very kindly said, you know what, the second semester was a medical leave. Take another semester for the second part of your sabbatical. And so because of that, because really of the generosity of BC, I had the chance to get the book completed during the sabbatical. And in writing it, one of the things I realized was that I needed to find some common threads that ran through this, that in some ways I was writing the book as a kind of series of ad hoc incidents or moments, and that to make the book really work for the reader, I realized I had to try to find some segues and some points of connection that led me from one incident or figure to another, and without imposing an artificial unity on the history, because I don't think it's a simple unified history here, but for the sake of the reader, trying to find some sort of overarching narrative that allowed the reader to sort of see some path of development and evolution in the tradition, and in some cases revolution. So what role for Christianity in the political order today? What role for Christianity in public life? I'm going to limit my remarks here or thoughts mainly to the United States. It might play out differently in other countries with other sorts of polities. But here in the U.S., it seems to me Christianity plays or can play a twofold role. And the way I think about it is the world of ideas and the world of action. The world of action may be the more obvious one. Christianity and Christian churches sponsor all sorts of organizations that have an impact on public life, whether it's healthcare, whether it's educational institutions, whether it's social service agencies, philanthropic activities. There's lots of ways that the Christian churches, qua churches, do things and mobilize around certain causes or issues and behaviors. There's also, of course, the manifold ways that individual Christians or informal groups of Christians come together for everything from food pantries in a neighborhood and trying to help with child nutrition or serve as home nursing care or the like, from things like that to groups of people getting together to lobby for public policy change, people who work on electoral campaigns or referenda issues or do letter writing campaigns. So there's lots of different ways in which Christians as individuals, as informal groups, and organized in more institutional or structured churches have acted in the political scene. And I do try and talk about that and touch upon some of those things in the later chapters of the book. But the other thing that perhaps is less immediately obvious to people is I think the important role that Christianity can play is the world of ideas in public life. And the way I look upon it is this. There is this thing in any society that we call the conventional wisdom. It's pretty much sets the terms of acceptable debate. There was a time in this country, for instance, that it was conventional wisdom that children worked in factories, that women stayed home and did work in the home, whether it be piecemeal work that they then sold or whether it was domestic labor. There was a time when it was conventional wisdom that people worked 6 days a week. People worked 10 and 12-hour days. And then somewhere along the way, those things became unconventional. And people talked about, well, we should have child labor laws. and we should have a set work week, and we should have minimum wages. And all of a sudden, things that would have been considered odd or unusual in the early part of the 19th century, by our own time now, is quite conventional. And anyone coming out with plans for economic reform now that were premised upon child labor of 9 or 10-year-olds working in mines or working in mills using heavy machinery would be considered odd or bizarre. It would simply not get a hearing. And so the question I have is, how does something that's beyond the pale of conventional wisdom all of a sudden become part of conventional wisdom? And how does something that is in the conventional wisdom fall out of it and move beyond the pale? And that, it seems to me, is one of the ways that Christianity can make a difference. It's not so much setting a specific agenda item or advocating for a particular policy. It's upholding certain values and certain ways of thinking about human life, both the dignity of individuals, the importance of the common good, what are the elements that make for good community. And out of that, we begin to think about what are the sorts of behaviors, what are the sorts of institutions, what are the sorts of laws and policies we need in order to allow human beings to flourish individually, for communities to be built that are truly fair and just. And I think that's the way that Christianity can have its biggest impact, actually, is does it help set the terms of the conventional wisdom of a society so that certain behaviors, whether it be torture, whether it be killing innocent civilians, whether it be environmental safeguards, that certain things Christianity proclaims or denounces, and in time a society comes to accept certain things or exclude certain things. And so it's in the shaping of the conventional wisdom that I'd like to think Christianity can really play a significant role. And that's not necessarily in a partisan way. It really is in a cultural formation way. Well, the takeaway for the book is an interesting way to think about why you write a book. What do you want the reader to get? And I suppose part of my intended takeaway, certainly I think for some people who perhaps don't know the history or don't understand the complexity of the history, I'd like them to realize that Christianity, one, has always played a role in public order. It's always been a factor, and the role that it's played has varied greatly. And the ways in which Christianity has engaged the political order has, as the subtitle of the book has it, conflict, cooptation, cooperation. Sometimes Christianity has really been at odds with the political institutions and political leadership and practices of a society. Sometimes it's worked very well and cooperated with these political institutions for the betterment of both and the betterment of the wider society. And sometimes, frankly, Christians have sort of lost their voice in a society. Sometimes the churches have simply been echo chambers of what everybody else was doing in the society. And they lost that, you might say, that prophetic edge that religion should have, whereby it doesn't simply baptize whatever a society or a culture endorses, but that it holds up certain ideals and challenges political institutions and political leadership to aspire to something more than what it already is. And so I would like for people to realize that interaction, it's not always been a happy story. It has sometimes been a story of repression. Sometimes it's been a story of violence. The church hasn't always been a consistent voice in holding up certain ideals, but that in its better moments, Christianity has made a very positive difference in the life of Western society, certainly. And acknowledging its drawbacks without ignoring them and facing up to them, still saying that on balance, it's a good thing that the Christian churches, the Christian communities have tried to take the duties and the responsibilities of citizenship seriously. And the ways in which that has played out in institutions and in public polities as diverse as the Roman Empire, to monarchical government, to parliamentary government, to limited constitutional democracies. The church has adopted and adapted various ways of interacting with these institutions. And I hope for the better. At least that's, on the whole, one of my theses, that it's been a good thing that Christianity has taken political life seriously.